The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving only a faint glow that barely lit the path ahead of me. The forest was still, unnaturally still, the kind of quiet that felt like the world was holding its breath. I took a deep breath, inhaling the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. The air was thick with moisture, but there was something else in it too, something off. But maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. It was my fault for coming this far into the woods, after all. I should have turned back hours ago. But now, the idea of retracing my steps felt more daunting than continuing forward. I'd been hiking all day, following a trail I thought I knew well. But somewhere along the way, the markers disappeared. The trees grew denser, the ground softer, the path less distinct. I checked my phone for service, nothing. No bars. Of course. I'd taken the old trail out of nostalgia, hoping for a quiet day away from the world. Now, that decision felt like a mistake. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders, shivering despite the warm air. It was only supposed to be a short hike, a way to clear my head. But now, with the sun gone and the shadows lengthening, the woods felt like they were closing in on me. I hadn't meant to get lost, but here I was. I turned my attention back to the trail, or what was left of it. The path had grown narrow and uneven, with thick underbrush spilling over the edges. My boots made soft squelching sounds as I trudged through the damp earth, the weight of each step making my legs ache. There were no sounds, no animals, nothing. The silence was almost deafening. Even the usual rustling of leaves in the breeze seemed to have stopped. Just the quiet thudding of my heart in my chest and the occasional snap of a twig beneath my feet. It was strange. The forest was supposed to be full of life, but now it felt empty, like it had been abandoned. I glanced around, trying to steady my breathing, but the trees just loomed, their trunks stretching into the sky like dark, gnarled fingers. The last slivers of daylight were disappearing fast. My head was starting to pound. I hadn't eaten in hours, and my stomach growled loudly, but I had no energy to stop and eat. I needed to find my way out. I walked faster, my pace quickening as I fought the rising panic in my chest. Every direction seemed to look the same thick trees, the same patches of uneven ground. I couldn't remember the last time I saw any clear markers. I stopped for a moment, trying to regain some sense of direction, but it only made things worse. My sense of time was slipping away. What felt like hours could have been minutes. The forest had an uncanny way of messing with your perception. I was starting to feel dizzy when I noticed something. Movement, faint and barely noticeable, just at the corner of my eye. I froze, my body stiff with fear. I turned, slowly, but there was nothing there. Just trees. The breeze was picking up now, but even it seemed unnatural, like it was pushing against me. I continued walking, the fear crawling up my spine like a creeping vine. Was I imagining things? Or was something really out there? I could feel the hairs on my neck standing up. Something wasn't right. My thoughts were jumbled, spinning. I tried to focus, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own pulse in my ears. And then I saw it. A figure, a silhouette, standing between the trees just up ahead. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't an animal either. The shape was too tall, too slender, with long arms that stretched almost unnaturally low to the ground. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I just stood there, frozen, watching it. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me back. A flash of panic surged through me. I had to run. I couldn't stand there any longer, staring at whatever this thing was. My body surged into motion before I could think. I spun around, sprinting as fast as I could through the forest, the branches whipping at my face, the ground uneven beneath my feet. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was I had to get away. I ran blindly, the weight of fear driving me forward. Every crack and snap in the woods sounded like it was chasing me. following me. I stumbled over roots, my legs burning with exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. My heart raced. The trees blurred around me. I had no idea how far I'd run or where I was anymore. I don't know how long I ran. The sky had completely darkened, the shadows all around me now deep and suffocating. Every breath felt sharp in my chest, and my feet were starting to feel like lead, heavy and sluggish. But I couldn't stop. Then I saw something, a faint flicker of light through the trees. I didn't think. I just ran toward it. As I approached, the light grew clearer, more defined. A small clearing, a campfire. I stopped short, my breath ragged, chest heaving. There, sitting around the fire, were a few figures, men, maybe? I couldn't make them out completely, but they seemed odd. Their faces were blurred, like they weren't quite real, or maybe it was just the firelight playing tricks. One of them stood up slowly, and my heart skipped a beat. I opened my mouth to call out, but no sound came. I was too exhausted, too scared to do anything but watch. The figure took a step toward me, then stopped. The forest went silent again. I was still too terrified to speak or move, frozen in place. But the figure didn't seem threatening. It just stood there, staring at me from behind the fire.
No rus, no egreschen.
It was as if it was waiting for me to make the first move. Then the man, or whatever he was, motioned toward the fire and, in a soft, slow voice, said something. I didn't catch it, my mind still racing, but then a wave of exhaustion hit me like a ton of bricks. My legs gave way, and I collapsed to the ground, feeling the cool earth beneath me. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up, the fire was still burning, and the figures had vanished. The only thing that remained was the soft glow of the dying embers and the quiet rustling of the trees. I felt safe, more than I had felt since I entered the woods. I stood up, shaking off the remnants of fear, and surveyed my surroundings. I wasn't sure how I had gotten here, but I could tell one thing for sure. I wasn't lost anymore. Somehow, the forest felt less oppressive. I wasn't sure what had happened or what I had seen, but I wasn't about to stick around and find out. The strange figures, the fire, they weren't my concern anymore. I had to get home. I turned and made my way back. The path was clearer now, the trees less dense, the ground firmer. My steps felt steady for the first time in hours. I kept walking, my heart slowly calming as the sound of running water reached my ears. A stream. I was close to the edge of the woods. By the time I reached the road, the first light of dawn was breaking on the horizon. The woods were behind me now, and I didn't look back. I made it out, and that's all that mattered. I've always loved the quiet of the woods, the stillness that hangs in the air like a soft blanket. It's the kind of place where you can escape from everything. The noise of the city, the stress of daily life, and all the constant chatter that fills your mind. I've hiked in the woods alone many times before. It's peaceful, therapeutic even. But on this particular day, things didn't feel quite right. Started out like any other hike. The weather was perfect, not too hot, not too cold. The trees were thick and green, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. I parked my car at the edge of the trailhead, grabbed my backpack, and began walking down the familiar path. It wasn't a heavily trafficked area. In fact, I rarely saw anyone else on the trails. That's part of the reason I liked it so much, the solitude. The first few hours were perfect. Birds chirped in the trees, and every so often, I'd stop to take a drink of water or rest for a moment. The path wound deeper into the forest, following the curve of a small stream. The sound of running water was soothing, and the scent of pine and damp earth filled the air. Everything felt normal, but as the afternoon wore on, something started to change. It was subtle at first, just a feeling that I couldn't shake. The air seemed heavier, colder, even though the sun was still high in the sky. The wind stopped blowing, and the silence became oppressive. Every footstep echoed too loudly, and I started to notice the rustling of leaves, but there were no animals to be seen. The woods felt empty. At one point, I stopped to take a break by a large rock that jutted out from the side of the trail. I sat down, my back against the cool stone, and pulled out a granola bar. It was then that I first heard it. A sound, a crack, like a twig snapping, came from deeper in the woods, off to my right. It was faint, but unmistakable. I froze. I had been hiking for hours, and there hadn't been a single other soul on the trail. It was too quiet. For a moment, I considered that it might just be an animal, a deer maybe, or a small critter. But no animal sounds had preceded it. It was like something was watching me, waiting. I stood up, brushing the crumbs from my hands, and started walking again, quicker now. The path narrowed and became more overgrown, the trees closing in around me. I glanced over my shoulder, but saw nothing, just the shifting shadows of the forest. The silence was broken only by the crunch of my boots on the dirt and leaves. That's when I heard it again. A soft, deliberate step, not from an animal. It was too heavy, too controlled. Someone or something was following me. I quickened my pace, my heart thudding in my chest. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But the sounds were unmistakable. Someone was out there, and they were getting closer. I reached for my phone, but there was no signal. Of course, there wasn't. It was always like that out here, and I'd always been fine with it before. I had no one to call anyway, no reason to panic. I could handle this. I always had. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. It wasn't English or any language I recognized. It was a low murmur, almost like a chant, came from somewhere deep in the woods, just ahead of me. And it wasn't just one voice. There were multiple voices, murmuring, repeating the same rhythm over and over. It sounded unnatural, wrong. My legs felt like they were filled with lead, but I forced myself to keep moving, to keep walking, to keep my mind from spiraling. The path ahead seemed to darken, the trees growing denser, the air heavier. The chant grew louder, but still too far away to make out. I could feel my pulse in my ears, a constant thrum that drowned out everything else. Then, as I walked, I noticed something, a shape just at the edge of my vision. I turned my head quickly, but it was gone. It could have been a trick of the light, the shadows playing off the trees. But it was enough to make me stop dead in my tracks. My breath caught in my throat. The woods felt different now, like they were closing in around me. The path was narrow and twisted, and I had the overwhelming feeling that I wasn't supposed to be here. I had been in these woods so many times before, and I knew this trail, but now nothing felt familiar. And then the sound came again, closer this time, a twig snapping underfoot. But this time, it wasn't from behind me. It was from right in front of me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the trees, the shadows. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I started to walk faster, moving quickly now, pushing myself to go faster even though I didn't know where I was going. It was like my instincts had taken over. My eyes darted around, and my mind screamed for me to run. I could hear them now, the voices, louder, clearer. I couldn't understand the words, but they were unmistakable. I didn't know who was out there or what they wanted, but I didn't want to find out. I stumbled through the woods, not caring about the branches scraping my arms or the rocks that made me trip. I just needed to get away. I pushed forward with every ounce of strength I had left, but the sound of those voices was everywhere now, surrounding me. No matter how fast I moved, they seemed to get closer. It was like they were drawing me in, pulling me deeper into the forest, into their reach. And then I saw it, the clearing. It appeared suddenly, like a hole in the woods that I hadn't noticed before. The ground was flat, the trees surrounding it like a wall. In the center of the clearing, there was a structure, a small wooden shack, barely standing, its roof caving in on one side. I didn't want to go any closer, but I was drawn to it, unable to stop myself. The chanting was louder now, and as I approached the shack, I could see figures standing in the shadows around it. Their faces were obscured by the darkness, but I could feel their eyes on me. I had to turn around. I had to leave. I didn't look back as I ran, not even once. I just ran, my heart hammered in my chest, my legs burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know where I was going anymore, just away from that place. Felt like an eternity, but eventually, the woods began to thin. The trees started to space out, the air lighter. The ground beneath me became more even. The sound of the voices faded, and by the time I reached the trailhead again, the only thing I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I didn't even look at the woods behind me. I just got in and drove. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been following me, something that was still out there in the woods, waiting. But I made it back. I got home that night, exhausted, but safe. That was weeks ago now. I haven't been back to those woods since, and I don't plan to. I don't know what it was I heard that day. I don't know what was following me, or who those figures were. All I know is that I'm lucky to have made it out, and that's enough for me. I wasn't sure why I decided to take the trail. It wasn't something I'd usually do, especially alone. But that afternoon, the sun was just right, and the woods felt inviting. I'd been hearing about this trail from people at work, nothing too special, but there was something about the way they described it. Quiet, serene, far from the usual crowds. Figured, why not? I needed some time to think, a break from the usual chaos. It had been a while since I'd been out in nature, and maybe that's what I needed. So, I packed a small bag with water, snacks, and my phone, just in case, and made my way to the edge of the forest. The trees were tall, old, and close together. The air was cool and fresh, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, even before I took my first step onto the dirt path. The sound of birds chirping and leaves rustling was soothing, but there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't identify. I kept walking, pushing the uneasy feeling to the back of my mind. The path wasn't hard to follow at first, winding gently through the trees, but it didn't take long for the familiar noise of the world to fade. No cars, no distant hum of people, just the forest and me. I looked up at the trees, feeling small beneath their massive trunks. There was a beauty to it, sure, but the deeper I went, the more isolated I felt. The sun had been out when I started, but now, after what felt like an hour, clouds started rolling in. The light dimmed, the wind picked up, causing the trees to sway and creak like they were alive. I paused for a moment, listening to the silence that followed the gusts. No birds, no sounds of animals, nothing. I shrugged it off. Maybe I'd gone too deep into the woods. I hadn't checked the map in a while, and I was starting to feel a little disoriented. But I was sure the path would loop back around eventually. I just had to keep going. Then, I noticed something strange. It wasn't immediately obvious, but after a few more steps, I saw it. Footprints. Barefoot. Fresh. The prints were odd though, as if they were made in a hurry, maybe stumbling. I bent down, examining them. They didn't look like they belonged to anyone I'd seen before. The size was too large and the shape of the prints too irregular. It was like someone had been running or maybe walking in an uneven way. I stood up quickly, looking around. The forest was dense, and the wind made the trees creak even louder now, but I could swear I wasn't alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and for a moment, my heart started to race. But there was nothing, no one. Still, I felt like I should turn back. I'd gone off course, and my instinct was to head home. But for some reason, I kept going. Maybe I was just curious. Maybe I thought the path would lead me to something interesting, something worth seeing. I don't know, but I kept walking. The path narrowed as I went deeper. The trees pressed in on either side, and the ground became uneven. I had to keep my eyes on the trail to avoid tripping over roots or rocks. The further I went, the less the world seemed to make sense. The trees became twisted and gnarled, their trunks bent unnaturally. It felt like I was in another world, like this forest wasn't the same one I'd walked into earlier. The next thing that struck me was the silence. It was so still. No more wind, no more birds, just a quiet, oppressive hush that made my chest tighten. I stopped walking, feeling that familiar unease creep back in. I pulled out my phone to check the time, but there was no signal. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen anyone else on the trail. A sharp crack of a branch snapped me out of my thoughts, and I spun around, but saw nothing. I stood there listening. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, and my hands felt clammy. Was it just an animal? I tried to convince myself it was. I kept telling myself that. I took a few more steps forward, but I could feel the ground shifting beneath me. The trail seemed to be getting harder to follow, like it was deliberately leading me off course. Or maybe I was just getting lost. I glanced down at my feet and then looked up again, trying to spot some landmark to guide me. But there was nothing. The trees around me had changed. They weren't normal trees anymore. They were twisted, like something you'd see in a nightmare. Their branches were gnarled, knotted like old fingers, and the air smelled wrong. Not earthy, not fresh. There was a sharp, metallic scent to the wind now. I stumbled forward more out of instinct than anything else. My gut was telling me to keep moving, but I didn't know where I was going. The path had become so overgrown that I couldn't see it clearly anymore. And then I heard it, a low, almost imperceptible rustling behind me. I froze. For a second, I thought it was just the wind, but then it came again, a faint sound, like something moving quickly through the brush. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the trees, dark and still. I don't know why, but something in me urged me to keep walking, faster this time. I picked up the pace, my breath coming out in ragged bursts. I needed to get out of here. The sun had disappeared behind a thick cloud cover, and the light was fading. The woods were growing darker, more suffocating. I could hear the sounds of my own footsteps now, louder than everything else, but still, there was something else out there. I don't know how long I was walking, but I could feel it now. Something was watching me. The air was thick with tension, and every time I turned a corner or moved to a new patch of trail, the feeling intensified. The rustling was growing louder, closer, like someone or something was moving just out of sight. Panic started to set in. My legs felt like they were moving on their own, carrying me faster, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't making any progress. The trees seemed to close in around me. The feeling of being trapped was overwhelming. Then, ahead of me, I saw something. It was small, almost insignificant at first, a flicker of movement. But as I got closer, I saw that it was a figure. Person hunched over, standing completely still. I froze. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. It just stood there, facing away from me. I tried to call out, but my voice wouldn't come. The air around me felt suffocating. I took a step forward, and the figure suddenly turned. It wasn't a person, though. It was just a shape, a shadow of a figure with no clear features. I took another step back, but that thing, it was getting closer. It moved unnaturally fast, its limbs jerking, and its shape began to distort. My heart pounded, and without thinking, I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Every footfall felt like it was taking me deeper into the woods. The path was gone now, replaced by thick brambles and overgrown vegetation. The dark figure was still behind me, its presence a suffocating weight in the air. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs burned, and my legs were giving out, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I didn't dare look back. Finally, after what felt like forever, I stumbled into a clearing. The figure was gone. The woods were eerily quiet, and the oppressive feeling seemed to lift. I don't know how I ended up in that clearing, but there, in the center of it, was a small trail, a real one I recognized. I followed it, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The forest around me seemed different now, more welcoming. As I emerged from the woods, I saw the familiar landmarks of civilization. I wasn't lost anymore. I never went back to that trail again. The woods were beautiful, but there was something wrong about them, something hidden in the shadows. I'm not sure what I saw, or if it was even real, but I know one thing for sure. I'll never forget that feeling. The feeling of being watched, the feeling of being hunted. And for all I know, the woods are still out there, waiting. It was supposed to be a quick hike, just a couple of hours in the woods. Nothing too ambitious. I had been on similar trails dozens of times before, always enjoying the isolation, the quiet, and the gentle crunch of leaves underfoot. This time, though, something felt different, though I couldn't put my finger on it. The trailhead was nestled on the edge of the forest, surrounded by a line of dense trees and a few scattered shrubs. The morning light was weak, filtering through a thin layer of clouds, casting long shadows on the ground. I had packed my essentials: water, a few snacks, my phone, and my camera. I wasn't planning on anything more than a leisurely walk, snapping pictures of the scenery. The woods weren't particularly dense in this part, more like a mixture of younger and older trees. The trail itself was well worn, with a clear path where people had tread before me. I started walking, my boots making soft sounds against the damp earth. The smell of fresh pine mixed with the rich, earthy scent of the forest floor. It was calm, and I felt at ease, enjoying the solitude. The only noise was the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant chirp of birds. For the first half hour, everything was exactly how I remembered it, peaceful and serene. But as I ventured deeper into the woods, something shifted. It wasn't a dramatic change, nothing I could point to directly. It was more of a feeling, an unease that slowly crept up on me. The air seemed thicker somehow, and I could swear that the trees were growing denser, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out more of the light. The usual sounds of the forest faded into the background, leaving a deep, oppressive silence that made me pause. I shook it off, telling myself that it was just my imagination. Everyone has moments like this, right? A random thought that makes you doubt the safety of your surroundings. I continued walking, pushing through the feeling, but the trail didn't seem as familiar anymore. The turns, the landmarks, nothing looked the way I remembered. My steps slowed as I tried to recall the path I had taken. I pulled out my phone to check the map, but the signal was weak, and the screen was mostly blank. I figured I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere, or maybe the trail was more overgrown than usual. It wasn't unusual for nature to reclaim paths that weren't maintained regularly, but the feeling of being lost crept in. My heart started to beat a little faster, and I scanned the trees around me, trying to find something familiar. That's when I noticed something strange. There were no animal sounds. Not a single bird chirped, not even the rustle of a squirrel in the brush. The silence was oppressive, like the whole forest had held its breath. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I should have turned back, but something made me keep going. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stubbornness. Or maybe I just wasn't ready to admit I was lost. I walked for what felt like hours, though I couldn't say for sure how much time had passed. My legs were starting to ache, my water bottle nearly empty, and the weight in my stomach told me I hadn't eaten enough that morning. I pulled out a granola bar and ate it quickly, looking around once more. Still nothing. No sounds. Just the eerie silence pressing in on me from all sides. By now, I knew something wasn't right. The path ahead twisted, turning at odd angles, and the trees around me were larger, older. The air was heavier, almost like it was suffocating me. I was definitely no longer on the main trail. I hadn't noticed it at first, but the ground beneath my boots had changed too. The dirt had become softer, muddier, and I was now walking through an area that felt less like a trail and more like an abandoned stretch of forest. I pulled out my phone again, hoping for some sign of reception, but there was nothing, no signal at all. A sickening realization spread through me. I was well and truly lost. My panic didn't set in immediately, but it simmered beneath the surface, clawing at my thoughts. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that I had only veered off the path, and I could get back if I just retraced my steps. But after another hour of walking in circles, that comforting thought began to fade. It was impossible to tell which direction I had come from. The woods all looked the same. Every tree seemed like the last one, every clearing just another identical patch of underbrush. I stopped to catch my breath and reassess the situation. My phone was nearly dead, and I had no signal. I had only a small flashlight in my bag, which was no use in the daylight, and I couldn't bring myself to use it just yet. I looked up at the sky. There was no sun. The clouds had thickened, turning a deep, ominous gray. The forest, which had once felt peaceful, now seemed like a trap. I tried to calm myself down. I needed to think clearly, but the longer I stood still, the more I felt the pressure of the woods closing in on me. A faint rustle in the distance caught my attention, and I froze, straining my ears to catch any sounds. But nothing, just more silence. That's when I noticed something strange on the ground. A trail of broken branches and flattened grass led off to the side, hidden beneath the undergrowth. It was subtle, but it was there, and it felt out of place, like something or someone had passed through recently. I approached it cautiously, wondering if it could lead me back to the main trail. The deeper I followed the trail, the more unsettling it became. The trees were denser here, and the shadows seemed darker. The air was thick with the smell of damp moss and decaying wood. I found myself on high alert, every crack of a twig or rustle in the underbrush making my heart race. But I couldn't stop. I had to keep going, didn't I? I was so close to finding something, anything that would help me get out. Then I found it, a small, forgotten clearing. The ground was covered in dead leaves and pine needles, and there, at the center, was a pile of rocks. But not just any pile of rocks, it was too deliberate, too neat. Someone or something had placed them there. I knelt down to examine it more closely, my hands trembling as I brushed aside some of the debris. The rocks were stacked in a pattern, like a crude, makeshift monument. And in the center of the pile was an object, a piece of fabric torn and frayed. I didn't touch it, but my eyes traced the edges, feeling the cold weight of fear settle in my chest. My mind was racing. Why would anyone leave something like this in the middle of the woods? I glanced around again, my stomach turning. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Every instinct told me to leave, but I couldn't just walk away. Not yet. I had to keep going. I stood up and looked around one last time. That's when I saw it, movement, just beyond the trees, a figure darting between the trunks. My heart lurched. It wasn't a person. It was too quick, too erratic, and I was sure it had seen me. Panic surged through me, and I spun around, scrambling back the way I had come. The ground was uneven, the trees pressing in on me, and every crackling leaf underfoot felt like a warning. I couldn't breathe. My chest was tight, and my thoughts scattered in 1,000 different directions. I wasn't alone. Something was watching me. Something had been following me. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the exhaustion in my legs, the pain in my side. I had to get out, had to find a way back. My mind was numb with fear, but I refused to stop. The figure was still there, just at the edge of my vision, always moving, always just out of sight. And then, suddenly, the trees parted. I emerged from the thick forest and found myself on a familiar trail. The realization hit me like a wave. I had somehow found my way back. I looked around, expecting to see someone or something waiting for me, but there was nothing. No sounds, no movement, just the trail stretching before me, clear and unobstructed. I don't know how I made it back. I don't know what happened in those woods. But when I reached the edge of the forest and saw the first signs of civilization, cars, houses, people, it all felt like a dream. I had never been so grateful to see the world outside the woods. Looking back now, I still don't understand what I experienced that day. I don't know what was in those woods with me. Maybe it was all in my head, a product of fear and isolation. Or maybe, just maybe, there's something out there in the deep woods that we aren't meant to understand. Whatever it was, it never followed me beyond the trees. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared. But I still don't go into those woods anymore, and I'll never forget the feeling of being watched. It was a stupid idea, I know, but there I was, standing at the edge of the woods, the sun barely hanging on to the horizon, casting long shadows over the trees. I'd been out in these woods countless times before, but something felt different tonight. Maybe it was the fact that I had ventured farther than I ever had. Or maybe it was the way the wind was shifting, the trees groaning and creaking like they were alive, and the air suddenly turning cold. It all started as a simple walk. I'd been cooped up for days, and the thought of getting some fresh air sounded like a good way to clear my head. I had no particular destination in mind, just the goal of walking off the stress of the week. But as I walked deeper into the forest, I found myself veering off the usual path. The familiar trail I usually took felt like it was too safe. So, I cut through the thick brush and followed a narrow deer track, the ground beneath my boots soft with the remnants of old leaves and the scent of damp earth. The deeper I went, the quieter it became, until the usual chirps and rustles of forest life disappeared. The only sounds were my footsteps and the occasional distant thud of a falling branch. At first, I didn't mind. I thought maybe I was just imagining things, but the silence started to feel oppressive. It was like the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine, but it stuck with me, making my steps feel heavier and my breathing a little quicker. The trees were dense here, much thicker than I remembered. The further I pushed forward, the more the light from the setting sun struggled to break through the canopy above. I thought I saw something in the corner of my eye, just a flicker, a movement. I paused and looked, but there was nothing. Just the trees, just the shadows. I kept moving, determined to push past the odd feeling. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe it was the isolation. But it didn't go away. In fact, it seemed to grow stronger, the air thicker, the woods darker. The trail, if it could even be called that anymore, started to fade, the ground underfoot turning from soft earth to a rough, uneven surface of rocks and roots. I tried to turn back, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the sense that there was something deeper in those woods, something I hadn't seen before. I walked on. After what felt like hours, though I knew it hadn't been, I found myself in a small clearing. The trees opened up just enough for the last rays of sunlight to break through, and the place felt like a pocket of peace amidst the growing darkness. For a moment, I thought maybe it wasn't so bad here. Maybe I'd found something serene, something untouched. But that thought didn't last long. As I stood there, looking around, I noticed something that made my heart race. In the center of the clearing, just beyond a patch of thick ferns, was something off. A structure, barely visible, half hidden by overgrown moss and vines. At first, I thought it might have been an old hunting blind or some forgotten shack, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't quite like anything I'd ever seen before. It was a small, dilapidated cabin, its wood rotting and splintered in places. The roof had caved in, and one of the walls was completely missing. It looked like it had been there for years, maybe decades, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. But there was something strange about it, something I couldn't place. A feeling deep in my gut told me I should turn around, that I should leave. But I didn't. Instead, I took a few hesitant steps toward the cabin, my breath shallow, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. There was no reason for it, no logical explanation, but I felt watched, as if something or someone was waiting just behind the trees, observing my every move. My pulse quickened as I stood at the threshold of the cabin, looking inside. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and earth, and the dim light from outside barely made it in. The floor was covered in rotting leaves and broken glass. There were old, rusted tools scattered around, remnants of something long forgotten. The walls were bare, except for strange marks that scratched their way across the wood, jagged and uneven. It almost looked like claw marks. My mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation, but none made sense. There was nothing here but the woods, and whatever had left those marks. I stepped inside. It was colder in here. The silence was suffocating. The floor creaked beneath my weight as I moved further in. I glanced around, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was nothing, just decay. But then, as I passed one of the corners, I froze. My eyes locked on something at the far side of the room, something I hadn't seen at first. A pile of old, tattered clothing, folded neatly in a corner. The fabric looked like it had been there for years, but there was a strange sense of care in how it was arranged. A dark stain, old and faded, marred the fabric. But what caught my attention wasn't the clothes. It was the small object nestled inside them. Pocket watch. I took a step closer, my hands shaking as I reached down to pick it up. It was cold to the touch, and I noticed that it had a crack across the glass. I turned it over in my hands, inspecting the back. There was nothing remarkable about it except for one thing, a small engraving. Just 3 words, "Time will tell." The words sent a chill down my spine, and I dropped the watch. It clattered on the floor, the sound echoing in the silence. My heart raced, and a sick feeling twisted in my stomach. Something was wrong. I could feel it deep in my bones. I turned to leave, but the door, the one I had come through, was gone. In its place was nothing but a solid wall of thick, tangled vines. I pressed my hands against the barrier, trying to pull it apart, but it was too strong. My breath quickened, my pulse hammering in my ears. I was trapped. I had no idea how, but somehow I had become a part of the forest. Panic started to set in. I backed away from the vines, my mind racing. There was no logical reason for this, no reason why the door should have disappeared. But as I turned in a circle, I realized something even worse. The clearing, the place I had stepped into, was gone. There were no trees, no sky. The cabin had become a part of the forest itself, its very foundation sinking deeper into the earth. The ground around me seemed to shift and change as I watched, the once familiar trees now closing in, their twisted trunks growing closer and closer. I wasn't in the woods anymore. The woods were in me. The darkness pressed in, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every step I took seemed to pull me deeper into something darker, more ancient. The forest wasn't just a place, it was alive, and it was angry. But then, in the midst of the panic, I heard it. A sound so faint, so distant, that at first, I thought I had imagined it. But then it grew louder, clearer, until I could make out the unmistakable sound of rustling leaves. Someone or something was coming. I ran. I didn't look back. Couldn't. My feet pounded the ground, the air thick with the sound of my own breath, the leaves beneath me crunching with every step. I ran for what felt like hours, stumbling through the underbrush, tripping over roots, until the world around me began to change. The trees started to thin, and the air felt lighter. And then, without warning, I burst through the edge of the forest and into an open field. I collapsed, gasping for breath, the sky above me wide and open. The woods were behind me and I was free. For the first time in what felt like forever, I looked back. The forest stood still and silent, but something had changed. There was a clearing now, a patch of open space where the cabin had once stood. And in the center of it, the vines hung still, no longer tangled or wild. And that was when I understood. The woods didn't let go. It didn't matter how far I ran or how fast. I would always be part of it. It was the forest's way of reminding me that nothing in this world was ever truly gone. Time, like the forest, never forgets. I don't go into those woods anymore. I don't think I'll ever be free. I've always been the type to take long hikes, even in places others might find too remote. The more isolated, the better in my mind. There's a freedom to being surrounded by nothing but trees and dirt beneath your feet. It's where I feel most alive. But that day, in the woods I'd been to dozens of times before, things went differently. It started like any other trip. The morning was cool, but not too cold. There was no sign of rain, and the sky was mostly clear, with just a few clouds scattered here and there. I threw on my backpack, checked the supplies, water, snacks, and a small first aid kit, and set off toward the trailhead. It's a familiar path, one I've walked countless times. The kind of hike that takes you deep into the heart of the woods, where the trees close in and the world feels quiet. I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. The first hour was fine, the usual peaceful hum of the forest around me. Birds called from the treetops, and the wind rustled through the leaves. The smell of pine was heavy in the air, fresh and earthy. My boots crunched along the dirt trail, the rhythm comforting. But then, about 2 hours in, something started to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious at first. Just a vague sense that the woods had grown unnaturally quiet. The usual sounds of birds and insects seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the soft crunch of my footsteps. I didn't think much of it, just figured the animals had moved further off or were hiding from the midday heat. Still, there was an unease creeping into my gut. Then, I reached a part of the trail I didn't recognize. It wasn't that the trail had changed. It was still the same path I'd walked 100 times before. But there was something about the way the trees were positioned, the way the light filtered through the canopy, that made me stop. I'd been on this trail so many times, and yet I felt like I'd never seen this part of it. I paused, looking around. The woods around me were dense, thick with undergrowth and shadow. It felt like I had stepped into a part of the forest that had been hidden from me all this time. The trail continued, winding through the trees, but for some reason, I hesitated. I thought about turning back. I'd hiked far enough, and maybe it was time to start heading home. But the thought of the hike being over felt wrong, like something was urging me to keep going, to see what lay ahead. Maybe it was my own curiosity, or maybe it was something deeper, something I couldn't explain. Either way, I pressed on. As I continued, the trees grew thicker, the shadows deeper. The air became heavier, colder. I wrapped my jacket around myself, though the temperature hadn't dropped. My heart began to race, but I told myself it was just my imagination. The woods do that to you. They make your mind wander, make you think things are strange when they're not. Then I heard something, a sound far off but distinct. It was like a crack, the sharp snap of a twig breaking. It didn't sound like any animal I knew. It wasn't the quick, scattering rustle of small creatures or the purposeful crunch of larger animals moving through the brush. It was deliberate, and it was close. I stopped, holding my breath. The forest around me seemed to hold its breath, too. There was no wind, no sound, just silence. For a long moment, I stood frozen, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. I waited, but nothing happened. The forest was still, too still. I shook my head, trying to clear the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe it was just a deer, I thought. Maybe a larger animal, like a bear, had stepped on something. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I moved forward again, more cautiously this time. The trail twisted, taking me deeper into the woods. The trees seemed to crowd in closer now, their trunks thick and dark, their branches low, casting long, eerie shadows. My pace quickened, though I didn't know why. I wasn't running from anything, but my body was reacting to some primal instinct I couldn't control. The next sound I heard was louder, a snap, followed by a rustling of leaves. It was unmistakable now. Someone or something was moving through the woods, and it wasn't far from me. I froze again, my hand instinctively reaching for the knife on my belt. I didn't know why. I'd never carried it before. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was the silence, the way everything seemed to be holding its breath. Whatever it was, my body was reacting to it. I listened carefully. The sounds were closer now. Someone, or something, was walking through the brush in the direction I was headed. But there was no wind, no rustling of leaves or branches overhead. The movement was unnatural, too quiet, as if it was trying to remain unnoticed. I wanted to call out, but my throat was dry. 1,000 scenarios played out in my head, some benign, some dangerous, but none of them made any sense. The woods were supposed to be quiet, but this was different. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stood still for a long time, listening, heart pounding. The sounds of movement continued, coming closer, and I could no longer ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. Something wasn't right, and it was getting closer. I decided to turn back. I couldn't see what it was, but my instincts were screaming at me to leave. Every fiber of my being told me that something dangerous was near. I turned on my heel, planning to retrace my steps, but the trail was different. The landmarks I recognized were gone. The trees seemed to have shifted, the underbrush thicker. I couldn't see the path I had just walked. I felt panic rise in my chest. I was lost. I started walking, though I didn't know which direction I was heading. The trees loomed over me, more menacing than comforting. My legs were sore, my breath shallow as I tried to keep my pace steady. I didn't know how long I'd been walking now, but it felt like hours, maybe more. It was then that I heard it again, the snap of a branch, closer this time. I could hear footsteps crunching against the forest floor, deliberate, slow. I stopped again, frozen. My mind raced. There was no animal that walked like this. No bear or deer or any creature I could think of. This was human, but there was no one there. I spun around, my eyes darting between the trees, trying to make sense of what was happening. But there was nothing, just the dark woods and the cold, suffocating silence. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran. The branches clawed at my face as I pushed through the undergrowth, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going. Hell, I didn't even know if I was still on a trail. But I had to move. I had to get out of those woods. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like an eternity. The trees closing in around me, the sound of footsteps always just behind me, but never quite catching up. I could feel the presence, though. It was there, just beyond my sight. Then I stumbled. My foot caught on something, a root, a rock I didn't know, and I fell to the ground. My knees scraped against the dirt, my palms scraped against rocks. I gasped, trying to catch my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. I scrambled to my feet, and that's when I saw it. A break in the trees, like clearing. I ran toward it, and when I broke through the trees, I nearly collapsed in relief. The clearing was wide and open, the sun shining down through the branches above. It felt like an oasis after the suffocating woods. I slowed my pace, my breaths coming in heavy gasps, and I looked around. There was no one there. I turned back to the woods, the dense trees, the path that seemed to have led me astray. But something about this place felt different, safe, as though the danger was left behind. I didn't know how I had made it out, but I had. The feeling of being watched was gone. The footsteps had stopped, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the woods were quiet again. I sat down in the clearing, exhausted. I didn't care anymore if I was lost, if I was in the wrong place. I just needed to breathe. And as I sat there, the world around me felt a little more normal. The birds returned, the wind picked up again, and everything felt, dare I say it, safe. Eventually, I made my way back to the path. The woods were still, peaceful. It was like the strange, heavy feeling had never been there. I don't know what happened that day. Maybe I'd been on the edge of panic, imagining things. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me. But the woods are big, and the things that happen out there aren't always what they seem. I made it out, though, and when I looked back at the trees one last time, I felt a kind of peace. Whatever had happened, whatever was watching me, I had made it through. I didn't hike alone for a long time after that. I don't think I'll ever look at the woods the same way again, but at least I made it out. And in the end, that's all that matters. I had always loved hiking, especially when it meant exploring the dense woods near my uncle's cabin. It was one of those places that didn't look too intimidating at first glance, just a patch of trees that stretched far beyond what seemed reasonable for someone alone. The kind of forest that seemed to breathe, its branches swaying even when there was no wind. It wasn't a park or a nature reserve, but a place you didn't dare enter without being prepared. I'd gone there many times, though usually with a group, never alone. But one afternoon, I found myself with nothing to do, a feeling I wasn't used to. I was staying at the cabin for the weekend, the air crisp with the onset of autumn, and the silence in the house was starting to get to me. I decided to take a walk, just a short one. I promised myself a quick hike up the trail to clear my head. The woods had always felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could get lost in my thoughts. Felt like an escape, like everything would be okay, as long as I stayed on the path. I grabbed my gear, a water bottle, my phone, mostly for emergency, a small snack, and a map of the area. I'd always been careful, never straying far from the trail. There were parts of the woods that were too dense, too wild, and I knew better than to risk getting stuck in them. The weather was good, clear skies and a light breeze that rustled the leaves. It was the perfect day to be outside, or at least I thought so. As I set off, the quiet of the forest enveloped me. It was so still, almost unnaturally so. The only sound was my boots crunching over the dry leaves and the occasional rustle of a small animal moving through the underbrush. At first, everything felt normal, peaceful even, but the further I went, the more it felt like something was off. A subtle unease settled in my stomach. I couldn't place it, but something in the air felt heavier than usual. I kept walking, telling myself it was nothing, just nerves. After all, I had hiked in these woods plenty of times. It wasn't like I hadn't spent hours in these woods before. It wasn't like there was anything particularly dangerous in these parts.
No bears. No wolves.
The worst thing I might encounter was a deer or maybe a fox, and I had seen them all 100 times. I knew these woods like the back of my hand. Yet, as the trail curved around a thick cluster of trees, I noticed something strange. The ground was covered in a series of deep tracks. They were too large for any animal I recognized. Too wide, too deep. A chill ran through me, and I crouched to get a better look. The prints were fresh, and they seemed to lead off the trail, into the woods, disappearing into the thickening trees. For a moment, I considered turning back, but the thought of being stuck alone in the cabin with nothing to do was worse than whatever was lurking out here. I continued on, my steps slower, more cautious now. It didn't take long for the light to shift. The sun was lower in the sky now, the shadows growing longer, and I could feel the forest changing around me. The trees felt taller, their trunks darker, and the air heavier. The silence felt deeper, more oppressive, as though the forest was holding its breath. I passed a clearing, and that's when I saw it. A pile of branches, twisted and knotted in a way that seemed deliberate. It wasn't a natural pile. Someone had built it. I wasn't sure why, but the sight of it made my skin crawl. It didn't make sense. No one else should be here. The nearest person was a few miles away at the cabin, and nobody had been out here in days, at least not that I knew of. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My mind raced, and I could feel my heart beating faster. There was no logical explanation for this. Whoever had built this, they weren't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be alone. I took a deep breath and turned to leave, but something caught my eye, a rope. Thin and frayed, just hanging from one of the trees nearby. It didn't look like it had been there long. In fact, it looked almost new. The knot at the end seemed deliberate, as though it had been tied there for a reason. It wasn't just a random piece of discarded rope. Now, I had a decision to make. I could keep moving, follow my original plan, and get out of the woods quickly, or I could investigate, follow the trail of odd things to see where it led. I didn't even have to think about it. I wasn't the type of person to turn away from mystery, especially not one that felt this wrong. I had to know. I followed the rope for a while, my heart pounding in my chest as I walked deeper into the woods. The trees grew thicker, and the ground became more uneven, with roots pushing up through the earth. It was getting harder to see, and the path wasn't clear anymore. Every step I took seemed to echo, unnervingly loud in the silence around me. The air felt cooler now, the breeze more forceful, like something was pushing against me. Then, in the distance, I saw it. A small structure, barely visible through the trees. It was made of logs and branches, crudely put together, and I could see that it was old, really old. It looked like a shack or a hut, something built hastily, without much care. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, but I pushed forward, unable to stop myself. The door to the structure was ajar, and I could see the remnants of what looked like a campfire just outside. The smell of burnt wood lingered in the air, mingling with the musty scent of decay. My breath quickened as I stepped closer, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I hesitated before entering. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the inside pitch black. I reached for my flashlight, but before I could turn it on, I heard a noise, a shuffle, a low, dragging sound. It came from within the darkness of the hut. My heart skipped a beat. I took a step back, trying to steady my breath. Then, as if by instinct, I turned and ran. My mind wasn't thinking. It was all instinct now. Run. Get out. Now. I crashed through the woods, branches scratching my face and arms, my breathing ragged as I stumbled over the uneven ground. I didn't know if something was following me, but I didn't dare look back. The sun was almost gone, and the woods had become an entirely different place, dark and suffocating. My feet were numb, and every sound around me seemed amplified, every snap of a twig making me flinch. Somehow, I made it back to the trail, though it didn't feel like I had been gone for long. It felt like hours had passed, but when I checked my phone, only a few minutes had gone by. My pulse was still racing, my chest tight with fear. I kept walking, faster now, not even sure where I was going, just needing to be away from that place, from whatever it was. Eventually, I reached the cabin, and I locked the door behind me. The relief was almost immediate, but the unease still gnawed at me. I didn't know what I had found out there, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back into those woods again. The feeling of being watched, of something else being out there, would stay with me long after the sun set. I couldn't shake the thought that whatever had made those tracks had left that rope and built that shack. It wasn't gone. It was still there somewhere in those woods, and it was waiting,